They say Muhammad Ali could beat anyone who stepped into the ring with him. The man who danced like a butterfly and stung like a bee. The man who defeated Sonny Liston, George Foreman, and Joe Frazier. The man who stood up to governments, refused to fight in wars he didn't believe in, and became more than a boxer. He became a symbol of courage, defiance, and unshakable will. But there was one man Muhammad Ali refused to fight, not because he was scared, not because he doubted his own abilities, but because of what happened backstage at a charity event in Las Vegas in 1997, a conversation that changed everything, a moment so powerful, so unexpected, that everyone who witnessed it walked away in stunned silence. That man was Steven Seagal. Yes, the same Steven Seagal you know from the movies. The action star, the martial artist, the man who moved through fight scenes like water, calm, controlled, and absolutely lethal. The man who had trained for decades in Aikido, a Japanese martial art focused not on aggression, but on redirecting energy, on ending conflicts without unnecessary violence. Now on the surface, this sounds crazy, right? Muhammad Ali, the greatest boxer of all time, refusing to fight an actor. A Hollywood tough guy. It doesn't make sense. Why would the champ, the man who never backed down from anyone, decline a fight with someone who wasn't even a professional fighter? That's exactly what the world thought. That's what the promoters thought. That's what the media thought. They assumed it was a missed opportunity. A publicity stunt gone wrong. A chance to make millions of dollars and create one of the most watched events in history wasted. But they were all wrong. Because what happened between Ali and Seagal that night wasn't about fear. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about fame or glory, or who could throw the hardest punch. It was about something far deeper. Something the cameras didn't catch. Something Hollywood tried to bury. Something that, to this day, only a handful of people know the full truth about. This is the story they don't want you to hear. The story of two warriors who met not as enemies, but as brothers. The story of a conversation that lasted only 20 minutes, but echoed for decades. The story of what Muhammad Ali whispered into Steven Seagal's ear, words so profound that Seagal himself has only spoken about them once, years later, in a rare moment of vulnerability. And when you hear what was said, it will change the way you think about strength, about power, about what it truly means to be a champion. Because here's the truth that no one talks about. The greatest fight is the one you walk away from. The strongest punch is the one you never throw, and the most powerful warriors are the ones who understand that violence is not the answer, it's the question. And the answer is almost always no. Muhammad Ali knew this, Steven Seagal knew this, and on that night in 1997, in a quiet room far away from the flashing lights and roaring crowds, two legends made a choice that the world would never understand. They chose respect over spectacle, wisdom over ego, brotherhood over business. So before we dive into what really happened that night, I want to ask you something. I want you to stop for a second and think, and then I want you to drop a comment below and tell me, Team Ali or Team Seagal, who do you think would have won if they had actually fought? More importantly, who do you think made the right choice by walking away? Let's see who the real champions are in this comment section. Las Vegas, 1997. The city of lights, the city of dreams. The city where fortunes are made and legends are born. The MGM Grand was hosting one of the biggest charity events of the year, a star-studded gala bringing together icons from sports, entertainment, and Hollywood. The kind of night where anything could happen. Muhammad Ali was the guest of honor. By then, the greatest of all time was 55 years old. Parkinson's disease had already begun its cruel work on his body. His hands trembled. His voice, once thunderous and sharp, had softened to a whisper. But his eyes, those eyes still burned with the fire of a champion. His presence still commanded every room he entered. His spirit was unbreakable. He walked through that ballroom like royalty. People parted like the Red Sea. Celebrities, millionaires, world leaders, they all wanted a moment with him. A handshake, a photo, a chance to be near greatness. Because even in his illness, Muhammad Ali was still the champ, still the people's champion, still the man who had proven that you could fight the world and win. Across the room, sitting quietly at a corner table, was Steven Seagal. At that time, Seagal was at the absolute peak of his Hollywood career. Movies like Under Siege, Hard to Kill, and Above the Law had made him a household name. He wasn't just another action star doing wire stunts and camera tricks. Seagal was the real deal, a 7th-degree black belt in Aikido, trained under some of the most respected masters in Japan. He had lived in Osaka for 15 years, studying the art, teaching it, breathing it. Aikido isn't like other martial arts. It's not about overpowering your opponent. It's not about landing the most punches or kicks. It's about harmony, about using your opponent's energy against them, about ending conflicts with the least amount of violence necessary. It's a warrior's art, yes, but it's a peaceful warrior's art. And Seagal embodied that philosophy. Calm, controlled, quiet confidence, but Hollywood doesn't care about philosophy. Hollywood wanted action. And Seagal gave it to them, breaking arms on screen, taking down bad guys with surgical precision, moving through fight choreography like a lethal shadow. To the world, he was a tough guy, a badass, someone you didn't mess with. But to those who truly knew martial arts, to those who understood the deeper principles, Steven Seagal was a master. Not just of technique, but of discipline, of restraint, of knowing when to move and when to stay absolutely still. Now, here's where the story gets interesting. The event organizers, the promoters, the money people, they saw an opportunity, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. They looked at Muhammad Ali, the greatest boxer who ever lived, still a global icon despite his illness. Then they looked at Steven Seagal, Hollywood's most dangerous man, a legitimate martial artist with millions of fans worldwide, and they had an idea. What if we put them together? Not a real fight, of course, an exhibition match, a friendly sparring session, something for charity, something for the cameras, something that would generate headlines around the world and raise millions of dollars. Ali's boxing legacy meets Seagal's martial arts mastery. The sweet science versus Aikido, Hollywood versus history. It sounded perfect. It sounded like a goldmine. It sounded like the kind of event that would be talked about for generations. So they approached Muhammad Ali's team first. They pitched the idea with enthusiasm, with dollar signs in their eyes, with visions of pay, per-view records being shattered. And Ali listened. He nodded. He smiled that beautiful, knowing smile that had charmed the world for decades. Then he shook his head no. Just like that. Simple. Final. No explanation. The promoters were stunned. They pushed back. Champ, it's just for show. No real punches. Just entertainment. Think of the charity. Think of the fans. Think of the legacy. But Ali didn't budge. He looked at them with those fierce, intelligent eyes and said something that stopped them coldly. I don't do fake fights, and I don't fight masters. The room went silent. Masters. What did that mean? Seagal was an actor, a movie star. Sure, he knew martial arts. But this was Muhammad Ali, the man who had faced the most dangerous fighters on the planet and beaten them all. Why would the champ call him a master? Before anyone could ask, the door opened, and Steven Seagal walked in. The energy in the room shifted instantly. It wasn't dramatic. There were no cameras flashing, no music playing, no announcer's voice booming through speakers. Just the soft click of a door closing and the quiet footsteps of a man walking across expensive carpet. Steven Seagal entered the private lounge area backstage, where Ali sat surrounded by his entourage, promoters and charity organizers. He wasn't wearing anything flashy, just a simple black suit, his long hair tied back, his expression calm and unreadable. No bodyguards, no assistants rushing ahead of him, just him, and somehow, that made him even more commanding. The promoters saw their chance. This was it: get both legends in the same room. Create the moment, build the hype, make it happen, or mitrap. Seagal, perfect timing? We were just discussing an incredible opportunity, but Seagal raised one hand, a gentle gesture, and the promoter's voice died mid-sentence. Not because Seagal was rude. Not because he was aggressive. But because there was something in that simple movement that commanded respect, an authority that didn't need to shout. He looked across the room at Muhammad Ali. Ali looked back. For a moment, nobody breathed. These were two men who had spent their entire lives being stared at, being challenged, being tested. Two men who understood what it meant to have a reputation. Two men who knew that everywhere they went, people were watching, judging, waiting to see if the legend matched the reality. But right now, in this moment, none of that mattered. It was just two warriors recognizing each other. The promoters, sensing an opportunity slipping away, jumped back in. Gentlemen, we have a proposal that could change everything. An exhibition match. Friendly, of course. All proceeds go to charity. The world would absolutely. No, Ali said softly, not breaking eye contact with Seagal. The promoter laughed nervously. Champ, with all due respect, we haven't even explained the full. I said no. Ali's voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a blade. Another promoter stepped forward, his desperation showing. Mr. Seagal, surely you see the value here. Your fans, his fans, this would be the most watched event in history. We're talking about your legacy, both of your legacies, coming together for something beautiful. Seagal finally spoke. His voice was low, measured, carrying the weight of someone who chose his words carefully. My legacy isn't built on spectacle. But think of what this could do. Think of the money for charity. I think, Seagal interrupted gently, that you should listen when someone says no. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Assistants glanced at each other nervously. Security personnel shifted their weight, unsure whether they should intervene or stay invisible. The promoters looked like men watching a fortune evaporate before their eyes. One of them, more aggressive than the others, decided to try a different approach. Is this about the money? Because we can negotiate. We can make this work for everyone. Ali's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Disappointment, maybe. Or sadness that these men understood so little. You think this is about money? Ali's words came out slowly, deliberately. You think everything is for sale? That's not what I meant, champ, Yes, it is. Ali leaned forward slightly. Even with his trembling hands, even with his weakened voice, he was still the most powerful presence in that room. You see two men and you see dollar signs. You see a show, you see entertainment, but you don't see what's really here. The promoter opened his mouth to argue, but Seagal spoke again. He's right. You're trying to turn respect into a transaction. We're trying to create something special. No, Seagal said calmly. You're trying to create a circus. And neither of us are clowns. The room erupted, not with violence but with chaos. Promoters talking over each other, trying to salvage the deal. Assistants whispering frantically into phones. Someone mentioning contracts. Someone else talking about missed opportunities. The volume rising, the desperation growing. And through it all, Ali and Seagal just looked at each other. Finally, Ali did something that silenced everyone instantly. He stood up. It took effort. His body didn't move the way it used to. His legs weren't steady. But he stood, with the dignity of a king rising from his throne, and he extended his trembling hand towards Steven Seagal. The room froze. Seagal moved forward. Not quickly, not aggressively. He walked with the measured grace of someone who had spent decades training his body to move with intention. When he reached Ali, he didn't just shake his hand. He bowed first, a deep, respectful bow. The kind of bow a student gives a master. The kind of bow that says, I see who you are and I honor it. Then he took Ali's hand in both of his own. Can we talk? Ali asked quietly. Loan? Seagal nodded. I'd be honored. And before anyone could protest, before the promoters could object, before the cameras could be called in, the two men walked toward a private room at the back of the lounge. The door closed behind them. And for the next 20 minutes, nobody knew what was happening inside. But what came out of that room would end the fight before it ever began. The door closed with a soft click that somehow felt louder than any punch Ali had ever thrown. Outside in the lounge, chaos reigned. Promoters paced back and forth, phones pressed to their ears, frantically calling investors, sponsors, media contacts. Assistants huddled in corners, whispering theories about what was happening behind that closed door. Security personnel stood awkwardly, unsure whether they should be guarding the door or giving the two legends their privacy. One promoter, the most aggressive of the bunch, kept checking his watch every 30 seconds. What are they talking about in there? We need to get in there. We need to make this happen. Ali's longtime cornerman, a man who had been with the champ through every major fight of his career, shook his head slowly. If Ali closed that door, there's a reason. Nobody's going in there. But the deal? There is no deal. You heard him. He said no. People say no all the time. It's a negotiation tactic. Everyone has a price. The cornerman looked at the promoter with something close to pity. You really don't understand who you're dealing with, do you? That man in there refused to fight in Vietnam. Cost him his title. Cost him millions. Cost him years of his prime. And he never regretted it for a second. You think your little exhibition match matters to him? Inside the room, far from the noise and the pressure and the desperation, Muhammad Ali and Steven Seagal sat across from each other in two comfortable chairs, no table between them, no barriers. Just two men face to face. For a long moment neither spoke. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that happens between people who don't need to fill every second with words. The kind of silence that warriors share when they recognize something in each other that doesn't require explanation. Finally, Ali spoke, his voice soft but clear. They don't understand. No, Seagal agreed. They don't. They think it's about who's stronger, who's faster, who would win. Ali's hands trembled slightly as he gestured, but his eyes were sharp, focused. They don't see what we see. Seagal leaned forward slightly. And what do we see? Ali smiled. That beautiful smile that had charmed the world. That the fight is already over. Has been for a long time. Outside the door, one of the younger assistants pressed his ear against the wood, trying to hear what was being said. An older staff member pulled him back. Don't. Whatever's happening in there, it's not for us. But I can't hear anything. Are they even talking? Sometimes the most important conversations are the quietest ones. Inside, Seagal spoke about his years in Japan. About his master Morihei Yeshiba's students, who taught him that true Aikido wasn't about defeating opponents. It was about resolving conflict without harm. About the principle of harmony, unity, love even. When I first learned to redirect an attack, Seagal said, I thought it was just technique. Just physics. Use their momentum against them. But my master told me something that changed everything. He said, the ultimate goal is not to defeat your enemy, but to help them defeat their own aggression. Ali nodded slowly. I learned something similar, but in a different way. In the ring, I could hurt people, could end careers, could put men in the hospital, and sometimes I did. But the older I got, the more I understood that the real victory wasn't in the knockout. It was in the choice. The choice to show mercy. The choice to uplift instead of destroy. They want us to fight for entertainment, Seagal said. They want us to be animals in a cage. And if we did it, even as an exhibition, even pulling our punches, would be saying that everything we learned, everything we believe can be bought. The two men sat in that truth for a moment. Outside, the promoters were getting more agitated. It's been 15 minutes. How long does it take to have a conversation? Maybe they're working out the details. Someone offered hopefully. Or maybe. Ali's cornerman said quietly, they're becoming friends. The aggressive promoter scoffed. Friends? They just met. Some people recognize each other instantly. Warriors especially. My grandfather used to say that men who have truly faced death, who have truly tested themselves, they can see it in each other's eyes. They don't need weeks or months to know if there's respect there. They know immediately. Back inside the room, the conversation had shifted. They talked about legacy, about what it means to be remembered, about the responsibility that comes with influence. When I refused to go to Vietnam, Ali said, his voice carrying the weight of that decision even decades later, people called me a coward, said I was afraid to fight. But I wasn't afraid of fighting. I was afraid of fighting for the wrong reasons. Seagal understood. Aikido teaches that the warrior's greatest strength is knowing when not to fight. Exactly. And these people, these promoters, they'll never understand that. To them, we're just products, commodities. Two names they can put on a poster to sell tickets. So what do? Ali's smile widened slightly. We teach them a lesson they'll never forget. Be walking away together. Seagal thought about this, then nodded slowly, a gesture of understanding passing between them that went deeper than words. There's something I want to tell you, Ali said, leaning forward slightly. Something for you to carry. And then Muhammad Ali whispered something into Steven Seagal's ear. Words that only the two of them would ever know. Words that Seagal would carry with him for the rest of his life. When Ali finished speaking, Seagal sat back, his expression unreadable but his eyes glistening slightly. Thank you, he said quietly. I'll never forget that. They stood simultaneously as if choreographed and embraced. Not the brief, back-slapping hug of acquaintances, but the firm, sustained embrace of brothers. Then they walked to the door together. When it opened, every head in the lounge turned. The promoters rushed forward, ready to pitch again, ready to negotiate, ready to salvage their golden opportunity. But before anyone could speak, Ali raised his hand. The silence that followed Ali's declaration was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that lounge. Promoters stood frozen, mouths half open, arguments dying on their lips. Assistants stopped typing mid-text. Even the security personnel seemed to straighten up, sensing that something significant had just happened, something far bigger than a canceled business deal. Champ, please, just hear us out one more time. The head promoter started, but Ali's expression stopped him cold. It wasn't anger on Ali's face. It wasn't frustration. It was something more powerful than both certainty. The absolute, unshakable certainty of a man who had made his decision and would not be moved by money, pressure, or persuasion. Steven Seagal stood beside him, equally unmoved, two immovable objects. Two men who had spent their entire lives being pushed, tested, challenged, and who had long ago learned the power of simply saying no. But why? Another promoter asked, desperation creeping into his voice. We're offering millions for charity. Millions of people would watch. This could be your legacy moment. Both of you. Seagal spoke then, his voice calm but carrying an edge that made everyone listen. Our legacy isn't something you can film and sell. With all due respect, Mr. Seagal, your movies, are entertainment. Seagal interrupted smoothly. Choreographed. Scripted. They serve a purpose, but they're not who I am. What you're asking for is different. You want us to validate the idea that respect is a commodity, that wisdom can be packaged, that everything meaningful can be turned into a show. The room felt smaller suddenly, the air thicker. People shifted uncomfortably. Some looked at their shoes. Others glanced at each other, silently asking if anyone else knew how to salvage this. We just thought. Someone began weakly. We know what you thought, Ali said softly. His trembling hand reached out and gently touched the arm of the nearest promoter, not in anger, but in something almost like compassion. You thought you could make something great by putting two names together. But greatness doesn't work that way. It's not addition. It's not about combining things. The promoters were starting to realize they had lost. Truly lost. But they still didn't understand why. One of them, a younger executive who had stayed quiet until now, finally asked the question everyone was thinking. What happened in that room? What did you two talk about? Ali and Seagal exchanged a glance. A small smile passed between them, the kind of smile that said they'll never get it, but that's okay. We talked about what matters, Ali said simply. Which is, not fighting. The young executive blinked, confused. But you're fighters, both of you. That's what you do? No, Seagal said quietly. That's what people think we do. But fighting is just a tool. The real question is, what do you use that tool for? Ali nodded. I fought for justice. For my people, for my beliefs. I fought in the ring because it was my path to something greater. But I never fought just to fight. I never fought just because someone wanted to watch, and I studied martial arts. Seagal continued, not to hurt people, but to understand harmony. To understand how to resolve conflict with the least amount of damage. Every technique in Aikido is designed to end a confrontation while causing minimal harm. That's the point. The room was listening now, really listening. The frantic energy had drained away, replaced by something else. Curiosity, maybe. Or the dawning realization that they were witnessing something rare. So when you ask us to fight, Ali said, his voice stronger now, heaven in an exhibition even for charity, even with the best intentions, you're asking us to betray everything we've learned. You're asking us to pretend that violence is entertainment. That combat is a game, but boxing is a sport. The aggressive promoter interjected, unable to help himself. You made millions from it. I did, Ali agreed, and I earned every dollar. But those fights meant something. They had stakes. They had purpose. What you're proposing is different. It's empty. It's two men pretending to compete for people who just want to see a spectacle. Seagal added, and more than that, it disrespects both our disciplines. It says that boxing and Aikido are the same. That punching and redirecting are equivalent. That the sweet science and the way of harmony can be compared in a ring. But they can't be. They're different paths to different truths. The cornerman who had been with Ali for decades finally spoke up, his voice filled with pride. You're teaching them that some things aren't for sale. Exactly, Ali said, turning to his old friend with warmth in his eyes. Some things you keep sacred. The young executive who had asked the original question stepped forward hesitantly. Can I ask, what did you say to each other? In that room, everyone leaned in, desperate to know what had been whispered. What secret had passed between two legends? Seagal looked at Ali, asking permission with his eyes. Ali nodded slightly. He told me. Seagal began, his voice softer now, more reflective, that a real fighter knows when not to fight. That you and I, we've already won our battles. We've already proven what we needed to prove. And that the greatest victory we could give the world wasn't a fight between us. Then what was it? Someone asked breathlessly. Seagal's eyes grew distant, remembering that moment, Ali's trembling hand on his shoulder, the weight of those words. He said, the greatest victory we can give them is showing them that two warriors can meet and choose peace. That respect is stronger than competition. That brotherhood is worth more than any prize. The room was completely silent now, and then, Seagal continued, his voice barely above a whisper. He told me something I'll carry for the rest of my life. He said, "You and I, we're not here to fight each other. We're here to fight for each other. For the idea that strength without wisdom is just violence. That power without purpose is just noise." A few people in the room felt their eyes sting. The aggressive promoter looked away, suddenly unable to meet anyone's gaze. Ali smiled that legendary smile and placed his hand on Seagal's shoulder. "This man understands what most people never will. And I won't disrespect that understanding by turning it into entertainment." Then Ali turned to face everyone in the room, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had faced down governments and won. "So the fight is off? Not because we're afraid. Not because the money isn't good, but because some things matter more than money. And if you can't understand that," he paused, letting the weight of his words settle, "then you're not ready to be in the same room with warriors. Let me tell you something that most people will never understand. The world is obsessed with winners and losers, with who's stronger, who's faster, who could beat who. We measure greatness by victories, by championships, by how many times someone stood over a defeated opponent. We worship the knockout. We celebrate the submission. We replay the moment someone falls and someone else rises. But here's the truth that Muhammad Ali and Steven Seagal understood, and that most people spend their entire lives never learning. The greatest victory is the fight you walk away from. Think about it. Really think about it. These were two men who had nothing left to prove. Ali had already defeated everyone who mattered. He had already changed the world, not just with his fists but with his courage, his principles, his willingness to sacrifice everything for what he believed in. He had already shown the world what a champion looks like, both in the ring and outside of it. Seagal had already mastered an art that most people couldn't even begin to understand. He had spent decades training his body, his mind, his spirit. He had learned from masters who had dedicated their entire lives to understanding not just how to fight, but why you shouldn't. He had absorbed the deepest principles of Aikido. That true strength is in harmony, not domination. So when they met that night in Las Vegas, they didn't see opponents. They saw reflections. Two warriors who had walked different paths, but arrived at the same truth that real power doesn't need to prove itself. The promoters saw dollar signs. The media saw headlines. The world saw a missed opportunity. But Ali and Seagal, they saw something else entirely. They saw a chance to teach the world something it desperately needed to learn. That respect isn't earned through combat. That wisdom isn't demonstrated through violence. That the strongest thing two powerful men can do isn't fight each other, it's honor each other. After that night, the media called it a publicity stunt. Sports commentators debated who would have won. Message boards and forums exploded with arguments about boxing versus martial arts, about who was tougher, who was more skilled, who would have walked away victorious. But they all missed the point entirely. There were no losers that night, only winners. Two men who chose dignity over spectacle, brotherhood over business, principle over profit. And years later, when people asked Seagal about it, he always gave the same answer. Meeting Ali was one of the greatest honors of my life. Not fighting him was the greatest victory. When Muhammad Ali passed away in 2016, the world mourned. Presidents, kings, celebrities, and ordinary people from every corner of the planet paid their respects. Memorial services were held. Documentaries were made. His legacy was celebrated and analyzed and immortalized. And on that day, Steven Seagal did something that perfectly captured the spirit of their relationship. He didn't do interviews. He didn't post on social media. He didn't make grand statements or try to claim a piece of Ali's spotlight. He attended the memorial service quietly, dressed in black, and stood at the back of the crowd. When it was over, he bowed deeply, that same bow he had given Ali 19 years earlier, and left without saying a word to anyone. Because that's what masters do. They honor each other in silence. They let their actions speak louder than words. They understand that some moments are too sacred for spectacle. So what's the lesson here? What's the takeaway from this story that you can apply to your own life? It's simple. Not every challenge needs to be accepted. Not every fight needs to be fought. Not every battle needs a winner. The next time someone tries to bait you, to pull you into drama, to make you prove yourself, remember Ali and Seagal. Remember two legends who had nothing to prove and everything to lose, who looked at each other and chose respect over ego. Remember that true power is quiet. True strength is choosing peace when you could choose violence. True wisdom is knowing that walking away from a fight doesn't make you weak. It makes you wise. Because at the end of the day, the fights you win are forgotten, the records fade, the championships get broken, the fame disappears, but the respect you show, the dignity you maintain, the principles you refuse to compromise, those things are eternal. Those things define your legacy. Those things are what people remember when everything else has turned to dust. Muhammad Ali and Steven Seagal never fought each other. And because of that choice, they gave us something far more valuable than any fight could have provided. They gave us a lesson in what it truly means to be a warrior. Not someone who fights because they can, but someone who doesn't fight because they don't have to. That's real power. That's real strength. That's real mastery.